Congratulations, good luck.
Yeah, no, good luck with your round.
Okay.
Objects and best of luck.
Right, so this is a little grand final, so I'd like teams inside figures from government and opposition to introduce themselves, so you can state any preferred pronouns if you have them, and because this is recorded, so please state whether you consent to be recorded. Starting inside government.
Yes, yes, that's okay.
Alright. You can also introduce your speakers.
I'll be doing the Prime Minister, and also the reply.
Akansha will be the GPM. Adrian will be the
Inside opposition. Alright, so in that case, I think we're ready to start. So on side government, we have basics. On side opposition, we have Seoul 1. On motion, this house believes that meritocracy has done more harm than good to the working class. All the prime minister to get rid of it.
Okay, I'll be doing the Prime Minister's speech, and I would like to thank the DAE team as well as the program. I'll be commencing my speech now. So today we are here to argue that this House believes that meritocracy has inherently done more harm than good towards the working class in our society. We live in a society that measures results in a vacuum over efforts. This is a point that will be continuously brought up in this debate by myself and by my peers. The current meritocratic system prides itself on opportunities being presented to whoever is more skilled, regardless to what circumstances you were born in. However, we believe that this is completely unrealistic and is not how it is reflected in the real world. So in reality, we are born into a nation and into a certain economic status and a family. And this is, of course, a lottery-like system. So for example, in terms of the family aspect, academic families, we know that they are drastically more likely to have their children pursue university education, more so than non-academic families. So the stakeholder in this debate is established as the working class, as the motion clearly states, and it will be our main focus throughout the entire debate, as we are trying to argue in favor of what favors them the most. We define the working class through the exploited class, as opposed to the exploiting class. So we clearly classify into two groups of people. So we believe that meritocracy is a false promise sold to the working class from the day they are born. I will be taking POIs after 5 minutes, so you can ask them. Let's move on to my first argument, and it's 2 layers. So we believe that meritocracy is an inherently flawed system. I'll be taking the example of South Korea, which is quite familiar. South Korea has a long history with meritocracy, with the Yangban system, which was introduced by the Chinese plaguing the peninsula for centuries. In this system, people were taking tests that were supposed to prove whether they are skilled enough to take, say, government positions. However, we know, especially from today's perspective, that this is not actually what happened, and that it caused nepotism to run rampant in Korea. We also know that currently, South Korea is a highly academized nation with more than 70% of people pursuing tertiary education. So this is more than most OECD countries. And respective uni rankings playing a huge part, as well as people going to hapwons, going to specialized schools and institutions, which cost a lot of money, and this proving whether they are allowed to go to these well-respected universities with good reputation, which will then give them better jobs in the future. So it is a very meritocratic system. We also know that IQ tests, for example, are a measurement system if we're talking about measurement system on who's more skilled or who's more intelligent, etc. We know that, say, IQ tests are a measurement system, we also believe that systems such as that one is inherently flawed. So, for example, the IQ test, if you look at an IQ test map, it consistently shows that the countries that rank the highest on average IQ are countries such as Japan, China, South Korea, again, highly academized countries where people pursue the most education and spend the most time on it. Whereas the countries that have the lowest IQ rates are countries such as Somalia. This does not mean that Somalians are inherently more stupid, or it does not mean that there is any less effort being conducted by them. It simply means that the opportunities are not equal. And this is a meritocratic system that attempts to justify itself by claiming that it rewards people who simply perform better. However, it does not take into account that the measurements that you are measuring it with, that you are taking for this, are not equal for everyone involved, and it does not exist in a vacuum. Moving on to how it is in a limited scope. So there is this underdog narrative that is pushed to the working class as a form of appeasement by the non-working class. So people are always represented by the very top percent. Let me give you an example. A politician that has to represent a rural area is most likely going to be a politician that went to university, got good education, that has the ability or the network to have reached that point. However, that politician is not going to accurately be representing these people in the rural area, their interests, or he's not going to have the actual insight on how these people genuinely live their lives. So, yes?
So under your world where meritocracy does not exist, how will people be evaluated?
We believe that meritocracy, as it is a false promise sold to the working class, we do not believe that people should not pursue education. However, we believe that working class people being told that they have a chance to perform better than their peers that were born into better situations is simply selling them a false promise. And that is why we believe that it causes more harm to the working class, because it diverts their attention away from the actual issues and any ways that they might be abused. So, the working class who struggles to make ends meet and is most vulnerable actor in every single conflict that most affected by external factors are assured that they too can be like the rich people if they simply work hard enough. Now, they're told things such as, oh, but you can get a scholarship. Your efforts will be recognized. However, we know that this is a lie, and this is simply told to working class people in order to encourage them to attempt to be like the people who they've seen at the very top since the day they were born. So, if we're talking about long-term benefits or a long-term vision, we know that for a long term, since the beginning of time and for more and in the future as well, for centuries, the pressure to perform in a system biased against them has been immense for the working class. And if you look at the system inherently as a whole, you can recognize that it is flawed, and it is not a system that we must defend, as it is inherently biased against working class people. And that is why we believe that meritocracy has done more harm than good for working class people. I'm going to propose.
And that's Speaker for that fine speech, and welcome Leader of Opposition.
Before I start, I also want to thank my wonderful team here for helping me so much to go all this way. I also want to thank all of the opponents we've met so far, and this is one of the hardest debates of my life, so we really got to improve our skills. And obviously, I want to say thank you to Suda and all of our wonderful mentors and coaches that helped us all the way up to our team. I will be starting my speech. So I would like to first make it clear what exactly it is we're debating today. We're trying to debate whether or not, over the course of history, the tendency to move towards meritocracy, the implementation and expansion of meritocracy has been more harmful or beneficial to workers, right? And we think, and working class, now the government did say define the working class as the exploited class. We think the exploited class is a little bit too vague of a term, right? They don't define what exactly exploitation is. So we're going to define working class in a little bit more clear way, which is to say the working class people are people whose livelihoods, that is to say their economic income, is not created solely by themselves, but they rely on a employer or third party to give them that income. So we're going to try to give a more clear definition, and we think this is perfectly unacceptable for the government as well, since this would also include people who are maybe exploited in their workplace. Now, one of the biggest benefits of meritocracy for the working class throughout history has been opportunity. And we need only look at the counterfactual to see what a world without meritocracy would look like. Let's look at the past. Now, they try to make it seem as if meritocracy also existed in the past, but when we're talking about the meritocracy throughout history, we're talking about real meritocracy, not nominal meritocracy. They talk about the Ganban system as an example of meritocracy, but the reason it's a bit hard to call that a real meritocracy is there were literal class divisions within society, right? So meritocracy is saying we're only going to be looking at the test results, but in the example that the government gave, that was not the case, right? The people who could take the test in the first place were limited. So we reject that premise. What we're defining is not nominal meritocracy, but real meritocracy, where the premise is that everyone can participate in whatever competition the same way, and they will only be evaluated based on their results. And so the first argument is obviously that this has increased opportunities for working class people, especially the exploited people. In the counterfactual, what was it like in the past? How did we evaluate who to give the best jobs, who to give the best pay? It usually had to do with your connections or how much money you have, right? At least in our case, if you had no money or if you had no connections, what path did you have? You had no path to try to get a good job. You had no path to get a better station in life. And a lot of times that station was determined from the day you were born. And again, this is something that the government takes issue with, right? Whether or not the circumstances that you were born with will determine your life. But at least under meritocracy, even if there is fierce competition, right? So long as you prove the results, so long as you get a good score on your test, so long as you have better results at work, you are rewarded for it, right? And the opposition kept trying to frame this as sort of a negative because we're only looking at the results, only looking at test scores, looking at how much money you make for the firm. This is bad because it's marginalizing people. What about the people who don't have access to resources? But let's look at the counterfactual, right? If we did not have meritocracy, if we were like in history and we looked at people based on their connections or their wealth, what choice do you have when you're born without connections, when you're born without wealth? What can you do, right? We admit that under meritocracy, it's not perfect. There are marginalized people. The difference is under meritocracy, marginalized people, marginalized workers have a chance to move out of their station so long as they work hard. Yes, Hagwons may be expensive. Yes, studying is expensive. You have to put a lot of resources into it. But at least if you succeed, even if it's a small chance, you can move out of that station as opposed to the counterfactual without meritocracy where you're stuck there for life. And we also actually reject the notion that the difference between the haves and the have-nots have actually gotten worse. Because again, yes, you do need to invest a lot into Hagwon, maybe you need to use a lot of money in order to study for the civil service exam, right? Maybe you need to get tertiary education and it's so expensive. But because society has come to become meritocratic, because society values merit, society has also been incentivized to help people earn merit, to help people improve their merits. Think about scholarships. Why do scholarships exist? On one hand, it exists to make sure that we don't lose people who are meritorious. If you have a good score, but your financial position isn't good, every single college in Korea at least, and many firms and many private institutions and even the government will be willing to take a look at your case and give you funding for the costs that you incur during your education because they don't want to lose your merit, right? And on the other hand, because we value merit so much, the society has also become incentivized to try to make more merit, to try to make more meritorious people, right? The entire education system in the past, let's talk about in the past, right, where it wasn't really a meritocratic system. We can look at, let's say, the K-12 education system. The K-12 education system was focused on what? Focused on making factory workers, right? These people, we don't care about merit, we only care about getting what we want, what the haves have, right? The exploiters have. But because we have come to realize that merit is good, and we want to try to get as many meritorious people as possible, in every aspect of society, it's become improved for the marginalized worker. Think about K-12 education. Public education funds, especially in South Korea, funds essentially everything for people, all in the name of making sure these people receive their education and grow up to become productive members of society, i.e. meritorious members of society. And we also think that the focus on merit and meritocracy has made the standard of living for workers much better. Because think about the meritorious worker. Yes?
Don't you believe that, so you mentioned public institutions, public education institutions, but don't you believe that it is the specializing institutions which are private that actually are the most corresponding to this meritocracy?
We understand, yes, there are going to be differences between institutions. We're not disacknowledging that. But what we are saying is we're trying to compare with the counterfactual. Has it done more good or harm? In the counterfactual, there are absolutely still institutional differences. Even if you're, let's say, a young man, you could take the test, right, the Kwagoshon or whatever, depending on your noble rank, the access of what type of institutions you could access, what type of tutors you could get were different, right? But at the very least, on our side of the house, even if the level of access is different, there is still a level of personal effort that can be made. It is not contingent solely on what access you have, but it's contingent on also the amount of effort you can make and the amount of results that you can make. And we also believe, like our next point was going to be, that for workers who are meritorious, because society has come to value merit and to reward merit over things like connections or wealth, people who are meritorious are incentivized to work harder, and as they work hard, they feel more satisfaction because they receive more bonus, they receive more compensation for their merit. So we believe that overall, the meritocracy has been a net benefit to the working class. Thank you very much.
Us government is to prove that the working class suffer much more harm in our side of the world, which is the working class than the benefits from more harm from the meritocracy than the benefits. And we do not need a counterfactual because we have to prove how harmful it is. Now I'll be starting from rebuttals to the opposition side and move on to the arguments from the government side. Now the opposition seems to focus a lot more on opportunities that the meritocracy provides a lot of opportunities for the working class. And they tend to focus a lot more on how the class does not exist or they seem to be less prevalent in their side of the world. Let me explain and let me put an emphasis on the classes still continues to exist even after meritocracy continues in this world. The classes still seem to exist. If the system continues even after 100 years and the working class continues to be exploited by the exploitative, as mentioned by the Prime Minister, how exactly is there any benefit in their side of the world? Please make it more explicit. Second of all, they seem to focus a lot more on how scholarships can be attained by these working class much more easily. Might I remind you that oftentimes the working class and the number of people who get these scholarships and benefits and opportunities, it's much more limited, and barely 5% of the working class. How relevant is this 5% of the working class when they only get scholarship on the basis of that? And they get a scholarship on the basis of better education, which is an access which is limited to privilege anyway. In order, I'll take that 5 minutes. This restricted access to better education will anyway bring them down, bring their chances of getting the education, bring their chances of getting the scholarship much less, and hence proves more harm. Now, might I also remind you that oftentimes people whose parents already went to the Sky University, these schools, these privileged schools, they are the ones who end up benefiting from this anyway. So the privilege continues to remain, the classes continues to remain, since the access is again limited only to the privileged in their side of the world. The likelihood of this benefit being received by the people who actually need it is almost close to nothing. Now moving on to my arguments from the government side, let me remind you how in theory it sounds wonderful that yes, people are being acknowledged on the basis of their talent and effort, but the reality is that people are determined by their class, their privilege, one's access. The result is what matters in meritocratical world, whereas at 5 minutes, and it is often in reality determined on the basis of one's access. It is a false promise and a trap made by the rich people to keep the working class, which is determined by their middle income, in the middle. They do not want them to succeed in their life. The rich want to become rich. That is a proven fact, and they want the poor to remain poorer. I'll go more into it in my argument. Now, first of all, this system setup is inherently to benefit the rich or the upper class. Why? If I have power, I would want my power to remain with me, not be decentralized. How does that work in the favor of working class? Letting someone be beneath me as a human is very intuitive. Why? Because if I'm a boss, I would like the working class to remain working class, not have opportunities, and remain working class and work underneath me. So the privilege continues to remain, the class system continues to remain, and I as a class will continue to remain in the upper class. Moving on to how human beings are inherently self-interest and they tend to work in a selfish way. Very, very naturally, human beings would want the best for themselves. I would want the best for my kids, and if I'm an upper class person, why would I want my kids to be on the same level as someone from working class? This does not have any benefit in their side of the world because it continues to remain in a way that human beings who are on upper level or upper privilege continues to have similar privileges moreover. Moving on to how that exactly, how this power remains in top. When I compare, for example, let me compare with developing countries. In developing countries in which the majority of the population is working class, there the wealth is so divided, the wage gap is so much that people have to get jobs on the basis of their network, connections and opportunities. If meritocracy is so good, why aren't people from the working class here actually advancing to the top? Please make me explain that. Oftentimes, middle class people in this system setup they stuck in this phase in which the system wants to keep them there. Mind and remind you, they want them to be there and keep it in it. Now moving on to my second argument, how this system justifies the exploitation of workers and laborers specifically. Oftentimes, these working class in developing countries and even to a certain extent in developed countries tend to be laborers, manufactured workers. This is a very vulnerable group, and as I mentioned, they take on the burden of work, and they are the ones who often get criticized. In this way, let me also explain. Okay, yes.
Yeah. Wouldn't you say that in developing countries, meritorious people being overlooked is a resource problem and not a problem to the meritocratic system? And how can you say that the meritocratic system has exacerbated the issues regarding class divisions and people being overlooked?
I couldn't understand that, so I'm sorry, I will not answer that. Moving on to how this system also is set in a way that it shifts the shame onto working class and not the privileged upper people. Workers are not acknowledged in their side of the world. Oftentimes when companies succeed, it's the CEO which gets the acknowledgement, not the actual workers who actually put sweat and tears into a particular project. It leads to more justification of exploitation of workers. As I mentioned, I'll be going back to my previous argument, which is the vulnerable groups such as laborers who often end up taking burden of the work and get criticized since their exploitation is justified in the way that, oh, if you're earning less, maybe you should work hard more. And hence it ends up in being more exploitative in a way that even if they are working hard enough, they are not acknowledged and they continue to pay less in their side of the world since they are only measured on the basis of their result and not the efforts they actually put onto it. Now moving on to how this is a false promise as mentioned by the PM before. Time is a luxury. We live in a world where time is a very, very hard luxury. Let me explain as a student. I'm a student. If I have to afford tuition, which is very expensive, and I have to work 2 to 3 jobs, it will take a lot more time for me to build my CV because I just simply don't have the time. I have to be able to afford my tuition, and hence I will have less experience. And even though I put in the same amount of effort into getting my degree, that because my result is less, as I mentioned before, their side of the system focuses a lot more on result than the actual efforts being put in. Simply, I will not be the one who will be guaranteed an opportunity, as I simply mentioned a lot. And hence, the long-term sides, hence, happy to propose. Thank you.
and these exploited workers and the exploiting workers, the difference between them still exists in their world, and the example is the past, because this is a has-done motion. We have to look how meritocracy actually changed from past way of measuring these abilities, which they never actually measured abilities. It was mostly because of of your hierarchy, like in the noble system, or how rich your families were, or something different than this. So what is the unique harm that they're proposing in this world? They never said that, and they also rebutted to our argument, saying that maybe getting the scholarship is very less likely for these people, and they have less access to getting better. However, this is not true, because in our world, companies and governments actually want people who can do the better job, because we're under meritocracy. So that is why people actually have scholarship, or they have more incentive to actually support people who were in this in this poor or bad circumstances, but actually to make them actually develop their skills, or actually support them if they have enough capacity. So our side actually has more incentive to actually for these entities to actually give more opportunities. However, let's bite the bullet and say that maybe these people actually have less access to it. Then let's think about the past, where opportunity didn't exist at all. And like I compared with the nobles and the citizens itself, or maybe they were the relationship between the power in the power and not power. Maybe that was the mechanism for working class to get higher, in Korea. However, in our world, when we actually value the ability of that person most, we can actually give a chance to the people who didn't have these opportunity in the past to actually show their opportunity. And the only stakeholder that they're talking about, the stakeholders who don't have the ability, we already proved to you how there's actually more incentive in our world to develop their skills, to actually and we're actually giving the ladder to actually for these people to earn more and to go onto the higher position. For example, they can go onto job training or education, but on their world it's impossible to actually for these people to actually get better in the first place, while in our case we actually give opportunity. So in the past, where these workers have to just work in 20 or 30 hours to actually just make a living, in the meritocracy system they can actually try new things, make them develop their skill to actually improve their lives in the first place. And education, like they also mentioned, is the representative example of how these people can actually overcome the social equality and go to a better place, because this only happens in the meritocracy system, where these people have the innate incentive to improve their skills, and for like I said, for the government and the companies, if they want to hire these people with much abilities, they will obviously will have the incentive to support that. And the Prime Minister and this DPM has this basic premise for saying that if you have a good family background, if you're rich, or if you're certain religion or something, then that obviously leads to success under meritocracy. However, that is not true, because for example, let's give an example about the private education, the Habon they give. Well, let's say the rich family, they were highly interested into education. Let's say they send all their children to Habon. Does that guarantee their child would go to the SNU or gain success in the future? No, that doesn't happen in our world, because ability is not totally 100% causal, but it's related to mostly to the effort itself, and for the ability and the process of process of the individual. However, in their world, and there's actually many examples in our world where there's let's look at Korea. They talk about these 양반 제도 just changed to more education. However, before in that 양반 제도, we already talked in the LO how it's not sufficient meritocracy. But let's say that it's meritocracy. After the Korean War, all of these hierarchies were gone. Everyone was started at the bottom, and Korea was able to. These workers, Korea has now one of the highest wages in the OECD, and that was possible because we valued meritocracy more. People went to education to actually improve their skills, and the companies actually hired these working classes. So that's why the economy and workers were able to succeed in our environment. And the example of the Korea economic status, which is given by the Prime Minister, actually supports our argument. And in their world, they keep talking about how we have to help these poor people or families who are not interested in education. So how are they gonna hire this working class? So this is a benefits that we only have to limit to the working class. So does the working class have to fight how much poor they are, how much worse condition they are? They never give. How are you gonna in our world, it's actually better for these people who actually have the capacity to get hired and to actually achieve their dreams, because they will get compensated more because of their effort. And we already mentioned how people who doesn't have the capacity will actually have the capacity to get better and improve their lives. Oh, okay, I'll take it.
So you mentioned that simply being more affluent does not guarantee that you will do well in Hackathons, for example, but what about gaining a job through networking or being admitted into private universities that have very high acceptance rates simply because being able to apply to them or guarantee you a spot?
So like higher actually like that is then that is actually worse in your world, because that is just like set it at the beginning. Like if you were born into a certain family, if you have that money, then everything is set it. And what about the people who are not in that position? They have no opportunities in their world without meritocracy, without no education. There's no improvement for these people in the first place. And they also talk about how like because these Korean education Korean was has like high IQ test scores because of like they have more education, and this only happens to the countries who are academics who has more academics, and they compare to the countries who doesn't have much academics. But let's flip their argument. So they're saying that if you get education, IQ gets better. So that's what they're saying. Then what we should actually think about is how to develop this how to develop the skills in this underdeveloped world, and that is actually not the part of this motion these days, because we're thinking about in the working class, and they're also assuming like competition between like countries, like competition of workers between like in Korea and Japan, where they get more education or what's going on, but they never address like these competitions that actually happens between like companies. Like if you want to become a civil servant in a certain country, or if you want to go to a specific company, that competition is not mentioned, and it's actually better on our side because we have these objective standards of meritocracy in our world. It's practical.
And that's the end of that participation. I welcome that member here.
Before starting my speech, I want to thank you, my lovely society, and everybody who has like appreciated me. I really appreciate you guys. I love you. Let me start my speech by reminding you, all of you guys, everybody sitting in this room is here not because of meritocracy, but rather why? Because you are so privileged. I bet that all of you went to international school. That's why you speak English. I bet that all of you, your parents have money and they send you to some external country, and that's why you speak English. And I think that if you are so good at debating, somebody you have met someone through networking, and that's why they have to join you. It's not because of meritocracy. And so let me literally tell you why meritocracy is so bad, and then why we are so privileged, and why the working class, that is not us, is literally being so damaged and harmed in this debate. I'm going to start my speech by actually going back to the class and tell you why I agree so much with government that I'm so hyped. So first of all, what does the government tell us? We go with South Korea about like how the classes were distinct, and that's why like according to classes you get more opportunities. And I agree, it's not only South Korea, let's go to London for example, but like nobility had more possibility of going to university, to this Eton, private, for example Eton, or like go to university or any other like that. And I believe that this is translated in the same way in the moral world. Why? But I think it's just like a little bit more extreme. First, when you, there's no more social classes anymore, but there's socioeconomic status. So basically, even if you, at least when you were in the past, you were born as like not nobility or like as a peasant, and you knew your whole life you didn't have any choice to go to university or to any to start something else. But in this status quo, what are we told? We are literally told that we have a chance. We are dropped into this life for the whole life, and then we can still get a chance as a working class. We can still get that one spot in the scholarship for this. That is the entire difference. So you lost one person in the country, one person in the whole state. Anyways, etc. And even if we don't have social classes anymore, we do have socio-economic status. And it is like literally measuring how much our parents or like how much the people that are like raising us are like able to support us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So could you explain why false hope is worse than despair? Isn't having a little bit of hope at least better than living your life in despair?
Yeah, actually, let me side is that basically at least I can work my whole life in the inspiration that I get something, that I can be someone, and I can become the president, and I can be a diplomat, even though I know it's because of nepotism and networking. But let me tell you something, what happened in our side, people might get worn out, like in South Korea, we are gonna mention again, they're like the societal rate is so high, and people take student like 3 times just to get into Sky University. So I believe that it's better in our side of the world, that we agree that have so much heart, that actually people we are acknowledging that they're suicidating, they're trying to kill themselves, they're trying to take antidepressants, there's so much anxiety and depression in this world. So let's acknowledge this fact, people. Let's not be blind by whatever government is telling you. What do we have for our next class is opportunity? What do we get? What do we get from the government side? We get that we have the public schools, companies, scholarships, support systems. But again, we do have like requirements to apply to these things. You cannot apply for a scholarship in a US university or like English-speaking university unless you take TOEFL or IELTS. How much TOEFL or IELTS? Because I bet everybody here knows like $200. Not everybody has like $200 out of the pocket just to pay for this TOEFL test. Anyways, also like if you want to apply to any other university, how much is the university application fee? $65, $45, and you know that you will not get in one university, so you have to apply to 10. How much dollar is that? Like at least 1,000. So just like the economic burden is huge. So I don't know why government keeps telling us bureaucracy is not something that blinds the social class, and then it just makes them spend more money and give them more money to the rich. So I believe that they are just going a little bit crazy with this. Even though we have public schools, but we have to compare to people that are actually compared to people that are actually getting more of the meritocracy spots. So even though we have scholarships, I agree, our scholarships and the spots are limited. But why is like in their side of the world people do not get scholarships? There's 100 scholarships, 90% of the scholarships will be achieved for the people that have like a sufficient curriculum enough to get a scholarship. What do I mean with the CV? You probably have to go to a lot of tournaments, and what do I mean going to a lot of tournaments and get a lot of certificates in the work? It means that you have to pay a lot of like application fee or like entrance fee for going into debate tournaments. Or let's not talk about debate, let's talk about something else. Like tutoring. You might want to, I don't know, like pass in some like LSAT. You need to pay for books, you need to pay for tutoring, because I bet that you cannot study by yourself and you need at least to spend some money. And at the end of the day, the person who has the best tutoring, the person who can buy the best books, and the person who can actually invest more money, which is like basically whatever the people can afford for them. What is that? Again, socioeconomic disparity between these classes, and at the end of the day, we have to acknowledge that it has more harm in our side of the world. That's the metrics. The impact of ours is bigger. The economic and socioeconomic burden is bigger. The likelihood of our side happening is like 100% because we know that we have to pay for everything, and it's something that it's impossible to avoid. What else I'm sorry. So at the end of the day, if all these scholarships that are supposed to be for the working class, that were created in order with like the purpose of meritocracy, they are not going to be going to the working class. They are going to be going to the more privileged people that, at the end of the day, were not even created for like meritocracy. And the last that we have is equality. Which side of this debate actually encourages equality more? Is their side of the world or is our side of the world? Equality. What do we have to do from their side? That at least they get more incentives, and that's why you at least have a chance in this world like to rise in companies. I'm not really sure about that, but I think that it was inside I told you before, there's an initial obstacle that meritocracy has put upon you. And even though we have like civil servant discounts, again, I don't think that these are limited to your side, because again, even if you want to go to a civil servant exam, for example, so you need to like enclose yourself in one of these academies for 1-2 years, and your parents have to pay for it anyways. Or like if you don't have parents or your parents cannot afford it, then you can actually not pay for it. You need tutoring for it anyways, you need to pay for it anyways, and at the end of the day, maybe if your parents are there working and you are a really high status, then you might even have like some possibility of actually cheating in the exam and getting in, as we all know it's possible on our side. And it's not gonna be equal, as I told you before, because as the Prime Minister told you, and my second speaker told you, equality does not exist in meritocracy when it was created from rich people to rich people. Thank you so much.
we agree that birth lottery is bad. We agree that economic resources are unbalanced inside status quo. That is the exact reason why we want to actually have meritocracy inside today's state. Because there are less economic resources and there are less relationship like impact of these individuals already inside status quo. But on the your side of the house, these people get evaluated based on the unfair individual, like these kind of economic resources inside status quo. We think that the only way these individuals can actually go get over those kind of unfair advantages is merit, which is a unique benefit we have already told you on the art side of the house. So when they say that this is a false hope, we don't think that this is a false hope. We think that this is the only hope of these individuals, because under status quo, your guys are going to be evaluating these people based on these kind of economic incomes and these kind of like relationships that they have to people inside the company. We don't want to do that. We want to evaluate based on the objective merits and objective quality of like efforts of these individuals. That's a unique benefit that we can provide you inside today's debate. Before going on to our team's 2 constructed classes, let's firstly clarify one thing, right? There says that classes still exist inside status quo, so all our harm is mitigated. Number 1, this is the exact reason why, because class still exists in status quo, it's not a mutually exclusive harm under your side of the house. You can say that these people are unfair inside status quo because class exists. This is not because, like, just because meritocracy exists, you never recognize why this class increases and why is it exacerbated by the narrative of meritocracy. Because if class difference still exists inside status quo, then you guys did not prove why meritocracy is related to exacerbating this class, then you guys cannot prove that this is a mutually exclusive harm. But we already proved to you under our side of the house that even if class does exist under our side of the house, we can provide to you the unique method to get over those classes, which is the meritocracy, which is the unique harm that we can provide you on the side of the show. So having that said, let's go on to 2 questions inside today's debate. Firstly, upon is meritocracy really flawed? Secondly, upon is which side is actually improving the life of working class, which think that the unique benefit of our side stands throughout the debate. Firstly, upon is meritocracy really flawed? In this class, there are 2 main important things. Firstly, is meritocracy really flawed? Is this erroneous in the first place? But second of all, even if it is flawed, is that a unique harm of these meritocracy in and of itself? Is the harm exacerbated just because of meritocracy? Firstly, is it really a flawed system? Their side talks about it's flawed because in South Korea, many people go to Hwang, and because people have a lot of money, they're going to be benefited because of birth lottery. Number 1, our second speaker clearly denied the premise that just because you go to Hwang, just because you are born in a rich family, does not mean that you succeed. We believe in the individual's effort to get over those kind of difficulties, right? Under their side of the house, they need to compare which side has more money, which side is born in a more rich family. But under our side of the house, because probably the more education and government subsidies increasing on our side of the house upon public education, then probably these people can get educated and increase their capacity, and that is a unique way where these people can get over those kind of things. And therefore, we think that the premise is wrong, that just because you have a lot of money, you get success, you get meritocracy, right? Meritocracy is based on effort, and we think that is a unique benefit under our side of the house. But secondly, on the your side of the house, it's worse, because now these people go to companies because I know the CEO of the company, I know the resource, and I have a lot of economic resources, and I know I have a lot of friends in that company. We believe this is more unfair under your side of the house. But furthermore, they talk about how IQ test is flawed or whatnot, like countries that rank high inside academic countries, like these people are like countries like Japan. Firstly, they never prove why this is actually a bad thing, right? We think that at least giving these people the hope that they have the better IQ, like they can improve their IQ by effort, getting effort, is actually a better hope under our side as compared to your side, that these people have no method whatsoever to actually climb up the social ladder in the first place. Let alone the fact that historical evidence already proves that because of merit, there are lots of access of individuals, and in the past there was this kind of class shingundedo, but now these people are more evaluated based on merit, and therefore people who are less privileged can actually become more accepted and under our side of us. Historical evidence clearly shows that meritocracy is not flawed. But secondly, their assumption about how result is all that matters, process is not matters. Number 1, we don't think so, right? Result is at least the most efficient and objective way to actually evaluate these people, because process is obviously related to the result. If you have good process, you probably have good results. And often these companies also measure the process of these individuals. But secondly, so how are you going to do it? How, if the result is such harmful, what is the status quo, and how are these people going to actually become evaluated, right? That is the exact reason why, at least on our side of us, the unique benefit is that we prepare a metric for individuals to actually get accepted. On their side, no metric. That's why we take the first clash. Second clash upon the actual benefit of these individuals. So they say that this is a false promise and this is bad, like giving hope to these individuals. Number one, we think that this is not a false promise, right? Academizing is actually the best thing that government policy can do. Like for instance, they already acknowledged the fact that Japan, countries like Japan and Korea are very academized country, and the very existence of this country means that a lot of countries will compete with each other in order to make better education systems in order to make these individuals more meritocratic under their side, under their country, right? Because there is a positive competition, because public education is going to more increase on the art side of the house, which means that scholarship can be more provided on the art side of the house. But even if this is a false promise, we think that at least there is some hope for these individuals to actually become better inside status quo, actually benefit compared to their side giving no metric whatsoever. We think that there is no unique harm given by their side of the house. But furthermore, we also prove to you about how the appreciation of effort can better happen for people who already have the capacity on the art side of the house, which was completely neglected by the government bench. Like people who actually have a lot of merit can now appreciate the happiness of effort. I like practice a lot, I got my merit increase, and I get more income. That is the mechanism of how effort actually leads to more happiness. But under their side of the house, that satisfaction does not happen under their side of the house. Unique harm, no engagement upon their side of the house. But furthermore, now society, now like these poor people who is in working class have to work long hours, even if they do have merit, because merit is not the predominant factor on their side of the house. And working long hours and doing inhumane things is what we want to actually don't do inside the THBT. Now these people can get more focused on getting education and increasing their capacities and merit. We think that this is a more humane solution for these individuals. But furthermore, their talk side also talks about how workers are not acknowledged. Only CEOs are not acknowledged. Number one, this is also not a mutually exclusive harm of meritocracy. CEOs and power imbalance and hierarchy also exist in status quo. You need to prove why meritocracy exacerbates this. Secondly, your side is worse because now people want to get good information, get good impression to the CEOs because relationship is what you get evaluated by, right? Because now, like at least my merit and my accomplishment is what protects me from the hierarchical structure that exists inside status quo. That's a unique harm under their side of the house, and because we put both clashes, we're extremely proud to oppose.
Let's talk about what exactly each side is trying to prove in this debate. The government is trying to, the opposition, we're trying to prove that meritocracy has made things better and that the overall improvements to the working class has outweighed the harms created by meritocracy, while the government is trying to prove the opposite, that the harms have been larger than the benefits. Well, here's the first problem. The government never mechanizes why any of the harms that they're presenting under meritocracy were exacerbated or resulted from meritocracy, right? They did a fantastic job of addressing the problems of meritocracy, right? Such as the difference between the rich, the have-nots, and the haves, or maybe the fact that people with connections still are in a more advantageous position. But what the opposition is trying to prove is not that those problems do not exist. The opposition was trying to prove that those problems have become a smaller factor in determining the fate of working class workers, right? We sufficiently proved that compared to the past, where those networks and those economic status was the primary measurement by which jobs or by compensation was given, at least with meritocracy, even if those people are in a more advantageous position, there is still a chance to compete. And in a lot of cases, that competition triumphs over those types of those circumstances, right? One of the examples we gave was the one that the government kept trying to push, which was the hagwon. Obviously, an access to a better hagwon may give you better chances. We conceded on that. But we see that meritocracy has at least made the difference between the haves and the have-nots at least smaller. Because even if they send, as our DLO said, even if you go to a really good hagwon, that doesn't guarantee that you're going to get into Sky. And just because you go into a bad hagwon, so long as you study really, really hard, as our DLO said, you can still go into Sky, right? So I'm not sure that the government has proved their burden, that meritocracy has done more harm, that has exaggerated the issues that already existed in the past, right? Another thing that they keep trying to talk about is they try to mitigate the benefits of meritocracy by saying that it's actually falsehood. But our WIP rejected that premise because objectively it is not a falsehood. Maybe it is not, it hasn't been fulfilled to the fullest extent, right? But we've proved that meritocracy is the better alternative, right? Maybe not everyone just because they study hard gets to go to Sky. Maybe not every worker just because they're really talented gets to go into a big company. But we proved that compared to the past, where that was totally impossible because merit was not the standard by which compensation or jobs was given by, at least here it is something that the have-nots can even compete with in the first place. In the past, how are you going to, as we said, how are you going to compete with connections? How are you going to compete with wealth? But at least even if it's stressful, right, to study for a test, to study for the 공무원 시험, at least you know that everyone's taking the same test. At least you know so long as that you score better, you will get that position. That is not a false hope. That is simply objectively saying so long as you prove that you are more meritorious, which in this case was a test score in the examples that we've given, you will be given the position that you're looking for. And I feel like they fail to sufficiently weigh why false hope is bad compared to the alternative without meritocracy. Yes, false hope can be a painful thing, but so is despair, right? I feel like despair is a guaranteed negative, as our side kept trying to say. Despair is a guaranteed negative. It is a terrifying thing for people to experience. But at least on our side of the house, even if it's false hope, even only a small amount of people earn false hope, at least they don't have to live under the guarantee of fear. They don't have to live in despair, right? At least they can be more satisfied with their lives, right? The government never mechanized why false hope necessarily leads to a bad life. Maybe you didn't get into Sky, but because of that false hope, you at least got into a lower tier university. Maybe you didn't get the exact position in government that you wanted, but at least under meritocracy, the false hope that it gave you allowed you to get a lower position in government. So I hope the judges will understand that it is the opposition that has proved the burden that meritocracy has done more good than harm, and not the government. Thank you for your
Before I commence my speech, the EPM would also like to thank everyone for coming. So, to give an overview of this debate, our plan as government team was clear: to stop propagating the idea that meritocracy is beneficial to the working class, and the working class being our main stakeholders and the main focus of this debate. And we focused on achieving class consciousness, or as the opposition team would frame it, despair. Meritocracy is a false promise sold to the working class by the upper class, and the opposition team has done a respectable job trying to sell that lie. However, if you look at their arguments concretely, you can tell that they did not sufficiently mechanize or frame them. So, opposition misunderstood the burden, which is to prove that meritocracy has caused more harm with all its negative ramifications that impact these vulnerable members of society, the working class. Let's begin with our claim that the meritocracy is an inherently flawed system, which was then rejected by WIP entirely, with nagging and contradicting their own team, who had previously claimed that they agree with us on this. We claim that there is restricted access to education and thus unfair, everyone in this room being a case example for this claim. We also disapprove of the claim that made opposition that people are simply given a chance to prove themselves, because this likelihood here is so small that it is an unfeasible argument. And let's stay grounded and realistic, correct? So the marginalized workers are encouraged to work hard. That is what opposition defends. However, they fail to recognize that this system is simply entirely not designed for the working class. It is designed by the upper class against the working class. So it causes stress. It causes, especially in countries such as South Korea, as we mentioned, causes even deaths. And this was completely not recognized by the opposition side in their argument. So instead they prefer to talk about scholarships, because scholarships avoid talent being lost. However, we say that this scope is so limited that it does not correctly address our stakeholders, as there are very few scholarships being handed out if you compare them to the working class as a whole, which makes up the majority of the people in society. So our scope included the working class as a whole and more correctly identified and addressed the stakeholders of this debate. The meritocratic system protects itself by justifying its own flaws and pushing its positive case examples forwards, these underdog stories or these scholarship examples, and promising people that they too could achieve the same results is simply a false promise, as we have continued to claim in this debate and as we have proven with our examples and our explanations. So, taking a look at the timeliness of this debate, we can talk about the short-term and long-term impacts of this. So, the short-term impacts on the government side is that these intense, high-stake meritocratic system kills, with South Korea being a prime example of the amount of stress that it puts on people due to this being always encouraged for people to prove themselves. Opposition side, however, says that they will create opportunities such as scholarships, which are in their mind sufficient as a short-term benefit. Let's look at the long-term benefits. Government, we claim that we need to get rid of the belief that is systematically etched into us from birth and achieve class consciousness by discouraging this claim that it is a fair system that does not cause more harm. The opposition side claimed that countries can improve over time. However, this is still the incorrect focus of this debate, because it will still benefit the upper class the most. And we would like to remind everyone that this motion clearly focuses on the working class, and that those are our main stakeholders. And we do not focus on individuals or on the upper class or countries as a whole, but rather the working class as a group of people.